So welcome everybody to today's webinar hosted by the Renewable Energy Committee in 350 Colorado. And I'm really excited to see so many of you here today, and want to say a very warm welcome to everyone, and also a huge welcome and thank you to our speaker today. So Julia, if you don't mind just waving so people can see you. So Julia will be joining us as our presenter today, and she is the events coordinator for the Denver Electric Vehicle Council and the head of the Automotive Business Team for Citizens Climate Lobby. She also works for Coltura to spearhead legislation to phase out gas cars in Colorado and other states. So we are really excited to have you, Julia. Looking forward to your presentation. And just to let everybody know, I will be monitoring the chat today. So if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And actually, I know a lot of times on our webinars, we have people who know a lot about the issue with us. So if you see something in the chat and you know the answer, you're welcome to chime in. So it's okay to use the chat. I'll also be asking folks if they have questions towards the end of our end of Julia's presentation. So there should be some time for Q&A. We're also going to hear from Nicole Burford, and if you don't mind waving, Nicole. Nicole's just going to speak for a few minutes at the end of Julia's presentation. She's with the Clean Energy Credit Union and is going to talk a little bit about what's happening at her credit union and some financing options regarding EVs that will be good for us all to know. So anyway, without further delay, I'm going to hand it to you, Julia. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Deb. And welcome everybody. So I have a lot to say, so I'm going to try to talk as fast as possible. If anyone has any questions, either put them in the chat or wait till the end. I'm going to put my email address in the chat at some point. And if there are because I know people have a lot of questions about EVs, so you can email me directly as well. So let me get going here. Okay. So I'm basically going to talk about a lot of aspects of how EVs, the benefits and sometimes the shortcomings of electric vehicles. So I'm going to start with the environment, since that's something that all of us are very interested in. Okay, so transportation in general accounts for about 1/4 of greenhouse emissions. So and that's not even including the fact that oil and gas itself accounts for another 11%. So if we can tackle this 1/4, this will be a huge impact on carbon emissions. So how much carbon do EVs use? So obviously they don't use zero. You still need electricity. Electricity has carbon emissions. You need to manufacture the vehicle, etc. So in general, EVs use about 1/2 to 1/5 of an ICE car. Now, ICE means internal combustion engine, so I'm going to be using that acronym. So now why is there discrepancy, 1/2 to 1/5? Well, of course, it depends to a certain extent on how clean the electricity grid is. So in Colorado, unfortunately, 40% or more of our electricity comes from coal. So we're kind of more towards the 1/2. If you go to, say, Washington, where most of it's hydroelectric, you'll get more to a 1/5. But of course, if you buy your EV, as the grid gets cleaner, this will go down. However, this is not the only reason. The cleanliness of the fuel is not the only reason why EVs are cleaner. Electricity is cleaner because it uses renewables, and then also power plants, since they're big, can have much better ways of scrubbing pollutants out than cars. So cars, they have to have, or ICE cars have to have something fairly small to scrub out the pollutants, and it just isn't as efficient as electricity. However, this is sort of the smaller reason why EVs emit less. The big one is energy efficiency. So ICE car, a gas car, uses about 17 to 21% of the energy it takes to actually go forward. And electric vehicle is much, much more efficient. So it uses 90 to 95% of that electricity to go forward. So this is a Tesla Model 3. So this is the most sold electric vehicle. And it's also, I think, the most efficient, given that it's a high mileage EV. It gets 142 miles per gallon equivalent of fuel. So if you took gasoline and you transferred it to electricity, you would be getting 142 miles per gallon. Okay, so another question people have a lot about electric vehicles is what happens to the old batteries. So people have this vision in their mind of electric vehicle, you know, getting an accident or dying in some way, or the battery not being able to use, and you just fling it in the landfill. Well, that's not what happens at all. So if a battery in an electric vehicle gets enough degradation so you don't want to use it in an EV, you can actually use it for things like grid storage. So it actually has a second life. However, if it gets to the point where you can't use it at all, maybe it's in an accident or something like that, EV batteries are recycled almost 100%, with 100% efficiency to make more batteries. So what this means is that, yes, we're going to have to do mining and get raw materials for the first generation of electric vehicles, but then we're just going to be reusing all these materials from then on. And strangely enough, so you probably know that if you recycle paper, you know, you can only do it a few times and then it just doesn't work anymore. The fibers get too small. But batteries made with recycled materials actually last longer. So they've done a study on that. I'm not sure why. Maybe the materials are more pure, but that's kind of interesting. So let's talk about safety. So this is something that people don't really think about when they think about electric vehicles. Mostly they're thinking about environmental impacts. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Tesla a lot, and the reason is twofold. First of all, they make like 2/3 of the EVs in the United States, and more than any other company in the world. But also, they're fairly transparent about things, so you can kind of get facts about them that you wouldn't get from another electric vehicle company. So you probably know about the crash tests that NHTSA does. So they basically take a car and then they put a crash test dummy in it, and then they impact it, and then they measure the injury to the crash test dummy. So if you look at, I mean, eventually they just take it and put it into a 5-point score. So you lose a lot of the subtleties. But if you look at the probability of injury, so the injury to that crash test dummy, the six Tesla cars have the lowest probability of injury of any car that NHTSA has ever tested. And that's like, you know, dozens and dozens of years of testing. So they are the safest cars that you can buy. But the question, of course, is that Tesla, or is it the fact that they're electric? So there was another study that was very interesting, done by IIHS, which is another big, it's an insurance organization, and they do a lot of the traffic testing. So what they did was very clever. So there's certain companies that basically took an ICE vehicle, a gas vehicle, and basically, to save costs, took exactly the same vehicle and electrified it. So for example, this is the Hyundai Kona here. This is electric. And then this is the gas car equivalent of it, which they also sell. So they looked, I mean, this is almost a perfect like scientific controlled experiment here, because they're the same car except for the powertrain. So they looked at injury claims in comparing these two kinds of cars. And what they found is that EVs were 40% lower in injury claims than for identical vehicles. And this was for two reasons. First of all, they simply got into fewer accidents. And I'll talk about that later, why that might be the case. And then if they did get into accidents, there were fewer injuries. Okay, so why is this? So let's first talk about crumple zones. So crumple zones, probably everybody knows, it's the front or the rear part of the car that sort of crumples when you get in an accident and takes all the force and prevents it from going into the cab. So EVs have at the front, they have something called a frunk. So this is a cute word for front trunk. So basically, the motor of an EV is down by between the wheels, and the battery is down at the very bottom of the car. So in the front, you basically have almost nothing. You have a little bit of materials to drive the console, but that's about it. So you have this thing called a frunk, which is basically a littler trunk that's in the front, and you can put suitcases in it, or in the case of this Ford Mach-E, for some unknown reason that only the Ford marketing department would know, you can fill it with shrimp and have a tailgate party. But anyway, this is all pure crumple zone. So there are no, I mean, if you look in an ICE car hood, it's just piled with metal and engine and all the stuff to run the engine and this and that, which you have to work around in order to create a crumple zone. Well, crumple zone happens just organically with an EV. This is all just smushable. And then in the back, it's the same thing. So this is the trunk of an EV of some sort. And you can see this thing, this is a sub trunk. So it's sort of another little trunk that is underneath the trunk. There's usually a lid here, but they took it off so you can see it. Now, why is it that an electric vehicle has a sub trunk and a gas car doesn't? Well, it doesn't have a fuel tank. So in the back, also, you've got all crumple zone. You don't have this big metal flammable thing that they have to protect in case you get in an accident. So great crumple zones, and you can see here's a crash test of the Tesla Model 3. So if an EV gets crashed into, the entire front part gets mashed, but the cab is pristine because it's not taking all that energy. Okay, so another thing that makes EVs safe is the center of gravity. So as I said before, the battery is under your feet as you're sitting in an electric vehicle, and it weighs about 1,000 pounds. It's very heavy. So as a result, the center of gravity of your car is very low. So that makes it so it doesn't spin out as much, and it also will not roll. And it also makes it so that the center of gravity is kind of in the middle. So it's not just low, it's also in the middle. So it reduces the probability of an accident because you won't lose control. And let me give you, so the Tesla Model X is Tesla's SUV. And it was the only SUV that NHTSA could not get to roll over. I mean, they tried and tried and tried, and they did not get it to roll over. And I'm going to show you this little video because it's just kind of cute of, this is internal testing of them, Tesla actually trying to get their Model X to roll over. Okay, so you can see, it kind of reminds me of that Weebles wobble, but they won't fall down kind of thing. So, so basically, it's so bottom heavy that it'll go way over, and then it'll just pop back. I don't know how to get to the next thing here. I don't want to do that. Sorry, folks. Just a second. Alrighty. Go here, and there we go. Okay, so another thing that makes EVs less likely to get in accidents is reaction time. So there's several ways that this comes into play. So first of all, regenerative braking. So I think probably most of you know what regenerative braking is, but I'm going to explain it anyway. So if in an EV, if you take your foot off the accelerator, it will brake for you immediately before you get your foot on the brake pedal. Now, why is this? Because it's taking the kinetic energy of your motion and putting it back into the battery. And it does this mostly to save electricity. But one of the results of it is that if you need to take your foot off the gas, off the accelerator, and put it on the brakes, because you're about to crash into something, by the time you get your foot on the brake, it's already slowing down for you. So there's this added protection there where you can prevent forward collisions because the car is braking for you. And then also people call EVs computers on wheels. So every car is mostly computer driven now, but the difference is that if you have an ICE car, you've got all this sort of mechanical stuff that the computer has to talk to. And even if the computer part of it can be very fast, all that mechanical engine and this and that has a certain reaction time, a higher reaction time. So a electric vehicle is very simple, like I said, basically a battery and a motor, and the motor is a very simple motor. So it's actually magnetic. So you don't necessarily have all these gear pieces sort of rubbing against each other. And it basically either goes forward and backward and fast and slow, and that's about it. So the reaction times can be extremely fast for an electric vehicle. It doesn't have the delays that a ICE car has. Okay, so let me talk about EV fires. So EV fires, it's sort of sad in that EVs actually have way fewer fires than gas cars. So this is, once again, Tesla discloses and most other companies don't, but it's probably comparable for all. So this is the number of fires per billion miles driven. And you can see that Tesla has like 10 or 11 times fewer fires than the US average. Now, there are more than 150 car fires per day in the United States. Now, the sad thing about this is every time there is an EV fire, for some reason, people seem to think it's national news or international news. So you always see these articles about, you know, whatever, a Tesla's on fire, a Bolt's on fire, or something like that. And you know, that fire can be somewhere in the United States. It could even be in Europe. I've seen articles. I think, really, Europe? Whereas if there's a local fire, I mean, I have driven by vehicle fires here in the Denver area, and I've gone to the news to make sure that people are all right, and they didn't even bother to report it. So, but there are fewer EV fires. So why do EV fires get so much press? Well, the first thing is that just psychologically, there's a lot of research on kind of how people psychologically approach new technology. It's kind of interesting. So new technology can't be slightly better in order to get acceptance. It has to be much, much, much better because people are just naturally suspicious of new things and new technologies. It's just something that was hardwired when we were, you know, in our tribal days. So one interesting little thing is that a new technology can't be a little bit better. It has to be like 10 times better. So what's better mean? Well, it depends on what you're looking at, but like 10 times cheaper or 10 times safer or whatever. It's not rational, but that's how human beings are. And then also new technology is simply interesting. It gets clicked. So if a Tesla catches on fire, it's just people are more likely to click than if a Honda Accord catches on fire. People just don't care. And then there have been some manufacturing defects in batteries recently. So the Bolt is kind of a famous one. So the GM sadly has to replace the batteries in many of its Bolts because of some manufacturing defects. Now, ICE cars also have manufacturing defects that cause fires, but even when they're new, but people don't really talk about that. Okay, so differences in EV and ICE fires. So first of all, how fast does the combustion happen? Well, if you're in a, if you're get in an accident and you find that your internal combustion engine has become an external combustion engine, you have to get out of there in like a minute or two, because the fire is going to spread extremely quickly with all that flammable liquid. So if you're in an EV accident and your battery catches on fire, well, it's a lot slower. So you have time to finish that text that you were texting that got you in the accident in the first place, and look around for your backpack and check the back to see if there's anything that you need to take, and then kind of slowly meander out. So there's a lot better safety there, because a battery fire simply does not spread as fast. So one disadvantage of EV fires is that they and people talk about this, I've seen this a lot, complaints about this, so that the battery, once it's damaged and has combusted, the cells in it can recombust. So if they're damaged, they can, over time, they can actually cause another fire. So what that means is that it really doesn't have any impact on the owner. What it has an impact on is the fire department that has to deal with it. So if an EV gets in a fire, what you have to do is you have to jack up the side of it so you can see underneath the battery. And then you call the new guy over. You say, hey, Joe, come over here. And then you say, okay, you give Joe an infrared monitor, and you sit him down and you say, okay, for the next 24 hours, I want you to monitor and look for any hot spots. And if there are any, I want you to just zap it with water. So, and then you and the rest of the guys go off and have lunch or something. So it's a little bit of a pain, but it's not really that big of a deal. And I know that they're working on automated systems that can simply monitor this and put out the hot spots without needing a person. Okay, so let's talk about maintenance here.
Hey, Julia.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to flag that I think sometimes when you're moving, there's a little bit of background noise. I'm not sure if there's anything right near your mic. So I just wanted to flag that. It's not, don't worry if we can't figure it out, but I just wanted to flag that.
Okay, I think it's my hair, so I'm just going to pull my hair back here and just tell me if it's happening again. Okay, so maintenance. Okay, so a gas car has a huge number of parts. So if you open the hood of a gas car, there seems to be an infinite number of parts in there. And I've had like old gas cars, and they'll break and they'll go and they'll tell me it's some part that I'd never heard of before, and it seems to be infinite. So an EV has many fewer moving parts. So it's basically, like I said, a very simple system: a battery and then a motor. The motor is about the size of a watermelon, and they really almost never break. So maintenance for an EV. Well, basically, this is about it. So windshield wiper fluid, tires, cabin air filter, and then in climates like Colorado, where it snows, you may need to clean the brakes every once in a while, because, like I said, with regenerative braking, you rarely use them. So that's it. No oil changes, no whatever, 150,000 mile checkup, whatever. So let's talk about reliability and longevity here. I'm going to just re-show this here as far as repairs. So you can see that if there are many fewer moving parts, I mean, moving is important because pieces are kind of rubbing together and it sort of wears them down and causes breakage. So repairs are much less for an EV because you don't have all those expensive parts that you need to repair. So how long do electric vehicles last? Well, electric vehicles have not been around very long, so we don't have a lot of real world data on how long they'll last. An ICE car at this point lasts an average of about 175,000 miles, 150 to 175,000 miles. And what does last mean? Well, the technical definition is that when repairs start to be more expensive than what the car is worth, then there's a cutoff. So that's kind of the official definition. But we don't know, we don't have real world data yet on EVs because they haven't really been on the road that long. So how do you figure out how long they'll last? Well, what you do, there's two major parts, as I said, the battery and the motor. So what they do is they do factory testing of these two parts. So factory testing a battery, basically what you do is you charge it, discharge, charge, discharge, and you do that and see how many times that can happen. And then you extrapolate, okay, if that was in the real life, how many miles would that be? And similarly with the motor, you just simply rev the motor forever and see how long it will last. Okay, so when they do this, how long do they find that these pieces last? Okay, now everyone hold on to your hats because this is pretty incredible. So both of these pieces are factory tested to 1 million miles. So a modern battery, the latest batteries anyway, the older ones were about 500,000, but now they're getting to 1 million miles, and the motors 1 million miles. So what does this mean? This means that these cars, if you assume that people are driving about 15,000 miles a year, that means that your car could last 66 years. So you could give an EV to your high school graduate, and that could be the car they drive until they're too old to drive, which is pretty amazing. Like I said, not real world data, but pretty interesting. Another thing I want to say is that brakes are they're not a real high item thing, but they're fairly high item. And like I said, a high ticket, sorry. Like I said, with regenerative braking, you simply don't use your brakes much. So I have a older Nissan Leaf, and I went to the Nissan dealer. There was some little wire that needed to be changed or something. So anyway, I went there and they were kind of talking. So the Nissan Leaf has been out since 2012, and they said that they have only had to fix the brake pads on one vehicle. And that person was someone who lived on a hill, charged to 100% every day, and then went down the hill. If you're charging to 100%, then you don't get regenerative braking because there's no place for those electrons to go. So she had to use the brakes a lot going downhill. And they said that was the only time. They gave her some education and they never saw her again. So brakes are another thing that really you don't need to deal with. Okay, so performance and driving experience here. So performance technically means quickness. People usually measure it as 0 to 60 or quarter mile. Now, probably most of you know electric vehicles are very quick. So this is a Tesla Model S Plaid. So that came out this summer, and it is now the fastest production vehicle that you can buy. So it is faster than the 3 million Bugattis and Lamborghinis and all this sort of stuff. Now, it's not a cheap vehicle. I can't afford a $130,000 vehicle, but considering what it's competing with, it's pretty amazingly cheap. So anyway, it takes the crown at this point for performance, but it is about to be dethroned by the Rimac Navara, which is a expensive supercar, but it's also electric, and it is getting 0 to 60 in 1.85 seconds. So it's a hand-built car. There are only going to be like 300 of them. But so the two quickest vehicles on the road today are both electric. Now this is kind of has its bad sides and its good sides and its bad sides. So at this point, electric vehicles are just getting quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And eventually every company, I mean, it's not easy to make them quick, but it's also much easier than a gas car. So eventually every single automaker will probably be able to make a very quick electric vehicle. So is this going to be a good thing? So let me show you this picture here, the stat picture here. So somebody bought a Tesla Model S Plaid, and they lent it to their friend, or they let their friend drive it. I think they were in the passenger seat. And this was in a residential area. So the person who drove it like instantly got it up to 115 miles an hour, hit an embankment, and went straight through this house. So something's going to have to be done, because if all cars are going to be that fast, it's going to be bad. Okay, so driving experience. So driving experience in an electric vehicle is just much nicer than a gas car for many, many reasons. First of all, it's smooth and quiet. So it just, you don't have these vibrations. You don't have this sort of, noise and stuff. It just feels like driving should feel, which is just perfectly smooth and quiet. You also don't get any smells. So ever since I was a kid, I hated the smell of cars. So I walk into a car and they all smell slightly different, but they all smell unpleasant. And I always thought that it was just off-gassing of the materials in the car. But then I got my EVs, or I've got a Tesla Model 3 and a Nissan Leaf. I got them and they don't smell like anything. They smell like my living room. And what I realized there is that what's happening is that either the gas fumes or the exhaust fumes are coming into the cabinet and permeating it. And that's what's making the smell, which is a little scary, because if they're going in there and permeating the cabin, they're also permeating your lungs as well. Okay, so they're also much more responsive. So because they have a fast reaction time, if you do something, they immediately, like they're reading your mind, respond. And steering is one example. You can just steer perfectly. You can, find a leaf like 100 feet down and steer for it and go. It seems like a gas car has more slop in the wheel or more randomness. And then there is instant acceleration. So I talked about how quick an EV is, but it's not just that it's quick, it's that it's instantly quick. So if I'm in even a fast gas car, if I'm at the light turns green and I just put my foot all the way down, there's all those gears and the stuff that, I don't know, they somehow get in the way. You can't just immediately go. Whereas with an EV, you can, and it's much more pleasant. And then regenerative braking, I'm just talking again there. It's really nice. You have to get used to it, but it's really nice to do regenerative braking. You basically only have to use the accelerator pedal. If you want to slow down, you go up. If you want to go faster, you go down. And then traction control. So the traction control on a Model 3, which is the one I know, it changes 1,000 times per second. So because it's such a simple piece of machinery, it can have perfect traction control that you can't get from an ICE vehicle. Okay, so let's talk about cost. So this is something people bring up a lot. Well, yeah, EVs are fine, but they're all expensive and they're only for rich people and this and that. So is this true or is this not? Well, kind of not. So within categories of cars, EVs cost about $5,000 to $6,000 more than ICE cars. What do I mean by categories? Well, like a subcompact sedan or something like that. But EVs do tend to be in high-end categories. So they tend to be like the Porsche Taycan here. They tend to be kind of luxury cars. Why is this? Because high-end vehicles tend to have greater profit margin. Okay, so at this point, automakers have to make these EVs with greater profit margins so they don't lose money. And then they take that profit margin and then they try to make a slightly less high-end vehicle and then even less. So it has to start at a high price here. So why do EVs cost more? Well, two reasons. First of all, batteries. So battery cost is just higher than the powertrain of an ICE vehicle. And then R&D and ramp up. So if you are, let's say you're Ford or something like that, if you have to make an electric vehicle like your MPGe, you can't just sort of take one of the cars you have and tweak it a little bit. You have to really start from scratch, and you have to learn how to do it. You have to create new factory machines in order to do it. You have to create a whole new factory probably. It costs a lot, and then you have to just learn how to do it. You're not an EV maker, so that's very expensive. And then ramp up. So just making it so that you can make these vehicles, you have to invest a lot in there. Usually what automakers do when they have a new car, I mean, it looks different from the outside, but really, as much as possible, they try to make it exactly the same as a different car that they have, and kind of trick people by making the exterior a little bit different. But that saves the money because they already have all the materials for it. They already have all the suppliers, etc. Now, the thing is, both of these issues are simply temporary. So that's true now, but it's not going to be true in the future. So battery costs. So battery costs has been, lithium-ion batteries have been falling in price by a lot. So this is in 2014. So you can see how they're going down like this. Now, 100 kilowatts per hour, or $100 per kilowatt, kilowatt hour. This is sort of the sweet spot where electric vehicles are going to be the same price for the same kind of vehicle as a gas car, as an ICE car. And then they're going to get even cheaper. So in the future, like 10 years from now, you're going to look back on when you thought that EVs were expensive and kind of laugh to yourself, because they won't be. They will be cheaper than gas cars. And this looks like, according to this person, it looks like it's going to happen around 2024. I think that it's going to happen earlier than that, because I do know certainly Tesla's creating its own batteries, and they'll be less than 100 kilowatts per hour when they get on there. Okay, so this is someone's projection on when EVs will cost less. So here we are in, well, somewhere in between these two lines here, and they're still more expensive. But as time goes on, you can see that the vehicle itself stays the same here, and the powertrain stays the same. It's really the cost of the battery in the EVs that are going down. And overall, it takes the battery aside, it takes less money to make an EV. And this yellow line here is how much an average gas car costs. So it's going to be less in the future. Okay, so, but that's just sticker price. Let me talk about total cost of ownership. So they've done some interesting comparisons. So a Tesla Model 3, people think of it as kind of an expensive car. And it's not cheap. It's not really as expensive as people think. It's actually, its starting price is even slightly less than average, but people think of them as fairly expensive. If you look at the 5-year total cost of ownership for a Tesla Model 3, it is less than a Honda Accord, which actually was my last ICE vehicle, and no one seemed to think it was anything special. Less than a Honda Accord, and depending on your gas and electricity, it can actually even be less than a Honda Civic, because the total cost of ownership is so much less for an electric vehicle. So let me talk about fueling cost here. So an ICE car, these are statistics I drew off government websites, people spend on average about $165 to $220 a month on fuel. And this was before the gas prices went up recently. This was, I don't know, a year or two ago. An electric vehicle takes about $30 to $50 per month to fuel. And depending on, whether you use time of use, electricity is cheaper at night and things like that. So much less. I mean, if you really look at this, you can say, if you get an EV and your monthly payments are $150 more than an ICE car, well, you're making that money back immediately in the amount of fuel you're not paying. Okay, so are EVs already cheaper? Well, they certainly aren't around here. But let me introduce you to the Hongguang Mini. So this is a joint venture with General Motors and Chinese companies. And this little guy here, now the interesting thing about the Hongguang Mini is it is actually for a while, the Tesla Model 3 was the top selling EV in the entire world for a long time. The Hongguang Mini, however, recently in some months has actually topped it. So it's not something you've ever heard of, but in China, they're selling like hotcakes. Why are they selling on like hotcakes? Well, one of the reasons is the price. So how much does it cost? I'm gonna basically pretend that you're guessing here. So 20,000. Okay, that's pretty cheap for a car. Most cars are more than 20,000. Less than that. So 10,000. Well, there's no car that you can get that is $10,000. Less than that. Okay, $5,000. Well, that's kind of getting ridiculous, right? I mean, you can pay for a e-bike for that. Less than $5,000. So this car is $4,200. So why is this car so cheap? Well, two reasons. So we talked about like why are EVs so expensive? One is R&D and ramp up. Well, China 10 years ago realized that EVs were the future, and China has a government. You can say bad things about it, but one thing it does do is it can sort of plan things in ways that countries like ours cannot do. So they decided 10 years ago, EVs are the future. We are going to make sure our EV industry is really, really good. So they really supported their EV industry. They sort of, picked among the EV companies that were doing well and the ones that weren't, and they asked them to merge and this and that. So they don't have R&D anymore. They don't have ramp up anymore because they were first in line. Just like Tesla doesn't really have that much either. So they were first in line. So that's gone. And then the battery is the other high cost. And this thing actually doesn't have a very big range. So it's really a city car. It's got a range of like 100 miles. So the battery cost is less. So you've got a ridiculously cheap car. I mean, imagine if something like this, assuming it had all the benefits and past safety and all this sort of stuff. Imagine if this was available for low-income people. I mean, you wouldn't even have to buy a used car. I mean, you can just buy this thing with very little, fueling and maintenance, and you're pretty well off here. Let me talk about charging here. So how do you charge an EV?
And hey, Julia, sorry to interrupt again. I just wanted to do a time check because I know you have a lot left in your presentation, and we have so many good questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to. So I just wanted to flag, we're at just about 12:30 now, so we have 30 minutes total. Okay. And so yeah, however, I know you said there were certain sections that were more important than others, so just wanted to flag that. And thanks for all there's so many good questions and lots of discussion in the chat.
Well, good. I'm glad. Okay, so I'll try to talk really fast, and I'll skip the parts that are just kind of dessert. Okay, so 3 levels. First of all, level 1 charging. So this is basically just charging it in any old wall outlet. And this is kind of cool because let's say you're in the middle of nowhere with your gas car, there's no gas stations around, and you run out of gas, there's not much you can do. You're sort of stuck there. If you are in your EV and you're in the middle of nowhere, worst comes to worst, you knock on someone's door with a, sad smile on your face, waving a $20 bill and say, hey, can I plug my car in? It'll take a long time, but you won't be stuck. Level 2 is, this is a dryer outlet. So this is usually what people use at home. Sometimes they'll use a level 1, but usually they use this. So that's how you charge your car at home. Get about 20 to 80 miles each hour. And then also there are public chargers that are level 2s. And one interesting thing about these level 2 chargers is that some of them are actually free. So you can go to like, sometimes governments will have them free, or malls, because they want you to kind of like go and spend money while your car is charging. So you can actually get free electricity. Now, how often do you get free gas? Not very often, you know. King of Supers gives you a discount and you're all excited about that. Okay, so level 3 is what you use for road trips. So that's much faster, 30 to 20 miles per minute. So it's usually like, you know, a half hour or something, 20 minutes to a half hour. Okay. Okay, so let me talk about how great home charging is. So you charge normally at home unless you're going on a road trip, which is fairly rare. So you never have to deal with gas stations. So you never have to go up to these machines and have them, you know, what's your zip code? And hey, we've got hot dogs on sale, and you know, someone's skimming your credit card. Don't have to worry about that at all. It literally takes 5 seconds. So when I plug in my car, my Tesla anyway, I mean, I don't even stop. So I'm walking by, I just grab the charger and put it in. I slow down, but I don't even stop. And then nice thing which people don't realize is that every morning you have a full tank. So you never have to worry about, oh, I have to go to the doctor, but I think I only have a quarter tank. Am I going to make it? None of that. You always have a full tank. You never have to worry about energy. Apartment charging is not so great. So if you don't have a garage to charge in, then you either have to use public chargers, which are, or fast chargers, which are a little difficult. I mean, it's just a hassle. So people are looking into things like putting chargers on light poles and things like this. Road trips. So let me just zip through here. So these are all, so Tesla has its proprietary chargers, and they are really the best. They're going to open them up to other people as well. And really, anywhere you want to go that isn't some little rural area, there are chargers. And it's actually much easier than a gas car, because all you have to do is just put in where you want to go, and it will tell you, it will lead you to every single supercharger that you need to go to. If you're going like at 120 miles an hour and you're using up too much fuel, it's monitoring that, and it'll tell you to slow down in order to get to your new supercharger. So it's completely, you just don't have to think at all. It does all the work for you. How much extra time do you spend charging? Well, this is the Marcus Brownlee, who's a tech YouTuber, if you know of him. So he did an experiment where he had 3 cars, 2 EVs, and a gas car go 1,000 miles in a day. And what he found is that the Tesla took about an hour and a half more. So maybe an hour and a half, 1,000 miles is a lot for a day, but it does take longer, but it's more than made up for the fact that you are charging at home. So, and that's much more convenient. I'm going to skip all this future stuff. It's actually really fun, but I'm just going to skip it because I don't think we have time.
Yeah, and Julia, I put your email in the chat. I was suggesting for folks who are, you know, I know there are a lot of folks who emailed me and are really interested in considering, you know, whether they want to go the EV car route. So I'm just going to quickly invite people to email you for the full deck, because I know I've reviewed your full deck and there's a lot of info in the slides themselves too.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. And do not be shy about emailing me. I mean, I will talk about, you know, anything you want as far as EVs. So feel free to email me. Don't feel shy about that. So accelerating the EV future. So I'm gonna, I know I showed this before, but I just want to emphasize how much carbon emissions are caused by transportation. And not only that, I just also want to emphasize, everyone knows this, but if a molecule of carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere, it's there for a very, very long time. It's affecting people who aren't even born yet. So the faster we can stop emitting, the better. So I'm going to talk about gas car phase out. So so we are, I'm trying to work on a eventual bill that will phase out gas cars in Colorado. So the idea here is that anything 2030 or more has to be zero emissions. So you can keep the cars you have before 2030, but if you buy a car 2030 or ever or after, it must be zero emission. And how does this help? Well, it helps the market plan. So right now, automakers, especially legacy large automakers, are unclear how much effort and how fast they need to put effort into making EVs, because if they go too fast, then they'll lose a lot of money, because they're losing money on these EVs right now. They have to fund them with their gas car things, and if no one's buying them, then that's a big catastrophe. So I've actually talked to people at Honda about this, and that's their biggest concern about EVs. And they actually really like to have sort of a deadline. I mean, it's like having a deadline for a term paper, then they can plan. And then, like I said, we'll prevent carbon emissions, a lot of carbon emissions. And then it also serves as role models for other states. So a lot of times legislators, they don't want to do anything new, you know, it's scary and kind of risky for their political career. But if everyone else is doing it, then it seems more doable and less risky for them personally. So these are states that have clean car plans or of some sort. So California, there's an executive order at 2035. Washington actually passed the Clean Cars bill, but the governor vetoed it, not because he didn't like it. He did like it, but someone had tacked on something that he didn't want. So he's going to make it an executive order. So here are a few others. Some of them are just plans and goals, and some of them have actually gone through their state Congress. Okay, so countries with a clean car policy. So this is a list I found of all countries that have clean car policies. So there's like some that are banning in the 2020s, which I think is our friend Norway. For some reason, the United States is green. I think it's just because of California. Okay, so why do it in 2030 versus 2035? Why don't we just give those poor automakers a break and allow them to wait until 2035? Well, this is the amount of CO2 tons saved if you have the bill at 2030 versus 2035. And you can see, I mean, both save a fair amount, but 2030 actually saves a lot. I mean, like a third more than you would get from 2035. And remember, this stuff goes in the atmosphere and it stays there for a very, very long time. Okay, so do people want this? I mean, you would kind of think they wouldn't. I mean, this is the United States, the country of don't tell me what to do, and I love my car and all this sort of stuff. Well, there was a poll that Coltura, the organization I'm working with, did, and there's an incredible amount of support in Colorado for a clean car bill of 2030. So Democrats 78% supported, Independents is 48%, and even Republicans it was almost half, which is pretty amazing. Overall, it was about a 50% support and 38% opposed for this. So they're really, despite what people think, there is a lot of support for this. So I am asking you, I know I gave you my email address, and feel free to ask me anything about electric vehicles, but also if you are interested in helping with this campaign, I think it's one of the biggest sort of bangs for the buck we can get in fighting carbon emissions, then use that email to email me, and we're going to start up a campaign, and I would really, really appreciate the help. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Julia. You are a wealth of info on electric vehicles, and I know a lot of folks who joined today were looking for more of the pros and cons, like you titled your presentation. So thank you. So I do have a list of questions from the chat that we'll get to, but first, I would love for Nicole to share a few words about the Clean Energy Credit Union, which is part of just what's available to us here in Colorado around support for those who might be thinking about EVs. So Nicole, I'll hand it over to you just for a couple of quick minutes. And Nicole's gonna pop something in the chat for us too as a resource. So go ahead, Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deb. And that was great, Julia. Thank you for that presentation. As mentioned, I'm Nicole Burford. I'm the Marketing Director at Clean Energy Credit Union. And some of you may have heard of us, but just want to give you a little information. We are a not-for-profit, federally funded, online-only credit union. We were founded in Boulder in 2017, and our mission is to create a world where everyone can participate in the clean energy movement. So in the past, it's been hard for some people to participate, and so that's our mission, and that's what we work towards every day. And we do that in a couple of ways. And one is financing strictly clean energy projects. So think buying electric cars, buying some of the hybrids that have the higher mileage, solar, residential solar, geothermal, electric bikes, and green home improvement. We finance all of those projects. We're really excited to say that this month we'll be financing our 5,000th loan. So we're really excited and happy that all of our members have supported us. And then on the other side, we know that people want a way to invest in and have their banking not support fossil fuels. So we have a full suite of financial services. So checking accounts, savings, CDs, money markets. And when you finance or when you bank with us, you know that your dollars are going directly to finance those clean energy projects. So we're not financing anything else. And if you are considering an electric vehicle purchase, we just want you to know that we have lots of options. Right now, our rates are as low as 2.29%, so very competitive. Because we're a not-for-profit, we don't have to please stakeholders. We just work towards our mission and our members. So we're constantly trying to bring the rates down and give our members the lowest rates that they can get. And then on top of that, we have a team of experts. They're financing auto loans every day. We give advice around incentives. We always say consult your tax officials, but we're always happy to help with that. And that's what I'm going to throw in the chat is an infographic that we built that really goes over some incentives. It also goes over some financing options, like what's the difference between going through your dealer or a bank or a credit union. So covering some of that. And then we talked a little bit about charging in the there. We can also help with that. If you need to upgrade your electric system, you need to add level 2 charger to your home. We have green home improvement loans where we can help you finance those as well, because sometimes we forget that we might need to make some upgrades there. So if anyone's interested, I could put my email in the chat. You can reach out, head to our website. You can apply there or give us a call. We have a great team, most located here in Colorado. So even though we are online only, we're here, and real people are answering the phone to help you guys out. So I'll put the infographic in the chat and let me know if you have questions.
Thank you, Nicole. And Nicole, we did get a question, or somebody asked specifically for your contact info. So if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat too.
Absolutely.
So
thanks.
we're going to move to questions, and it looks like Julia just answered one of the questions from the chat just around level 2 and 3 charger. So thank you, Julia, for getting to that. And I just want to say, I know there are a lot of folks who this might be one of your first webinars with us, or I just want to say Nicole and Julia are both members of our 350 Colorado Renewable Energy Committee, and we have a bunch of other folks on the call who are part of that committee, and that committee is open to anyone. We meet monthly on the 3rd Friday at noon. And if anybody would like, I'll put my email in the chat too. I facilitate those calls. If anybody would like to join us, we come from a variety of backgrounds and areas of expertise, but our goal in that group is to provide information and education around the transition to renewable energy in the state. And then also during the legislative session, we'll be entirely focused on supporting legislation that's promoting this transition to renewable energy. So just wanted to give that quick background. So jumping into some of these questions. So Fred asked, will aluminum diode batteries replace lithium batteries? Do you know anything about that or have any insight on that, Julia?
I think that I might be wrong. I'm trying to remember. There's a lot of battery technology out there that's being worked on, so solid state. And I think the aluminum ones are like the iron ones where they use, they basically oxidize, I think. Will they replace it? Well, battery, the thing about batteries is that there are a whole bunch of criteria you have to use. So in order to get a good battery. So it has to charge quickly, it has to discharge quickly, it has to last a long time, it can't be flammable, it has to weigh not very much. So there are all these sorts of things. And it's easy to find a battery that can do a few of those. It's very difficult to find one that can do many. So I don't think I have the expertise to really give an answer to that, but you know, there is a lot of promise out there.
Thanks, Julia. There were also a couple of questions just around the nickel that's required and the mining impacts of nickel mining, and then also about the cobalt mining and child labor in Congo. So there were a couple people that asked about that. And then someone asked about Tesla and the treatment of its workers. I'm just wondering if you could say anything about some of these ethical concerns that we need to wrestle with.
Sure, yeah. So let me start with cobalt mining. So here's the concern with cobalt mining is that a lot of cobalt comes from the Congo, and there are artisan mines there that use child labor. So that is true, and it's also true that EVs use cobalt. However, there's sort of an implicit kind of thing. Well, that means that EVs are using those particular mines with the child labor, and that's actually not true. So any automaker, well, any non-Chinese automaker, I don't know what they're doing, make sure that they're getting the cobalt from the bigger mines that are not using child labor. Now, where do these artisan mines sell their cobalt? Well, unfortunately, they sell it to electronics. So first of all, an iPhone uses way more cobalt. Admittedly, it's smaller, but the percentage of cobalt is way more in electronics than they are in EVs. EVs are actually phasing out cobalt. So Tesla now, its latest batteries don't have any, or some of their batteries. So cobalt, I think, really, it's not a real issue. It's one of those issues that, you know, is kind of conjured up, but I think that the cobalt that's in an EV battery, really, you don't have to worry about. So nickel, well, I mean, there are other minerals, nickel, copper, and things like that, which EVs use in a greater percentage. Oh, I also want to say with cobalt that the oil industry also uses cobalt. It uses the majority of cobalt. So you're not really, you know, gaining anything from getting a gas car. So anyway, nickel and copper, yes. So that is something we will have to do a lot of mining of certain materials in order to make batteries. And that's just sort of an unfortunate, you know, thing we have to do. But I think that's one of the few environmental disadvantages. And like I said, once we have these batteries, we can just simply recycle them all. But we do have to, I think the only issue there really is that we do have to make sure that the mines that are using it are sustainable, so that they're beneficial to the communities around them instead of taking advantage of them, that they use renewable energy, etc. So there is a big nickel mining company that has switched to renewables, and it actually has an advantage for the communities in that what they do is that they set up these solar systems for their mining, and then when the mine's done, they simply donate it to the community. So now this community has this you know, the sustainable and cheap energy that they wouldn't have otherwise. But it is something that will have to be monitored, and that's just a matter of making sure that the you know, that the automakers are being responsible here. There was another question. Yeah. Oh, Tesla and its workers. Yeah. I mean, Tesla treats its workers fine. The thing is, Tesla's kind of a clickbait kind of thing. so there's sort of a combination. Tesla's a clickbait kind of thing. People like to hear about it because I don't know why. And then also negative news is a clickbait sort of thing. So there was somebody I talked to that worked for Waymo, I think, or Uber, one of the autonomous kind of things. And they used to work for Tesla. And what they said is that one of the things they hated most about working for Tesla is that every week they get multiple calls from journalists who wanted to hear like some sort of bad thing about Tesla. And they said they learned really quickly that in order to get them to hang up, they just simply said good things, and then they weren't interested in them more. So I think it's just a pseudo issue. I think Tesla treats this work.
Okay, thank you for that. There was a question about living, this is Amy who asked about living in an apartment without access to high voltage charging. Do you have any suggestions for folks who are renters? How do you do the charging if you're a renter?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's sort of an issue. I mean, personally, if I had to go to a fast charger and charge, I don't think I would have an EV, but some people seem to make it work. So, yeah. I mean, it is an issue, and it's an issue that we have to have put in place things where landlords have to provide access, and we need to have curbside charging and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. And I know there was part of your presentation where you talked on that a little bit too. So it's an area we need to be weaving into the planning going forward. Can you say anything about who sponsors the safety studies, or the sponsorship of the studies in general? Yeah, there was a question about that.
Oh, interesting. Well, NHTSA is a government organization, and then the IIHS it's an insurance company organization. So basically, if you are let's say you're Allstate, you need to know like how much you charge for insurance for different kinds of cars and things like that. So they do a lot of studies on safety. Don't know if they do crash tests, but they do a lot of really, really good statistical studies. So when I mean, like decades ago, when I was going to buy a car, I spent a lot of time on their website because they have really, really good data on that.
And Julia, if you wouldn't mind, can you just say those one more time, just in case folks wanted to look?
Oh, sure. I'll type it in here. So NHTSA is the National Highway. What is it called? Transportation safety something.
Yeah, I just know I was going to jot it down. I was like, wait, what was that? So I just wanted to say it one more time.
And IIHS. So okay. I think that's Insurance Institute of Highway Safety, I think, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have just time for a couple more questions. So this is from another Amy. Could you talk about the costs of recycling EV batteries and how that can be brought down so it's more competitive with the cost of making EV batteries from new materials?
Yeah, so I mean, it is right now, it is pretty expensive to recycle EV batteries. Is it more expensive than creating them from scratch? I think at this point it's kind of a wash. But the thing is, once again, because it's a new industry, people have to put a lot of money into, R&D and how are we going to do this and stuff like that. So the thing is, batteries at this point, they're just recycling batteries that are factory defects pretty much, or some accidents. I mean, the really tidal wave of EV batteries is going to come when all these EVs on the road get to the point where they need to recycle their batteries because they're too old. So we have a lot of time, but there are companies that are doing this. So they have been making it work. Right now, they're mostly recycling also electronics. So you can go and send your which I would recommend. If you have like a drawer full of old electronics, I would send them into these companies.
Thank you, Julia. So Lee was asking about advice on buying a used EV. And she had heard that the early model Sparks might be a good option. Do you have any advice for her about that?
I don't know a lot about that. Is it the Chevy Spark? Is that right? Is that what it is?
I'm guessing that she didn't say that, but I'm guessing.
I mean, I think I remember hearing good things, but I don't know a lot about it, so I don't necessarily want to come up with something. I mean, I think it has a good. I think it has a. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good for that era. Yeah.
And I know, just since I have a used EV, I can chime in. For anybody in the Boulder area, Green Eyed Motors is a really great resource for used EVs. And yeah, so it might even be worth a phone call to them. It's called Green Eyed Motors. That's where I got I have a used Nissan Leaf. Okay. And I just want to say thank you for all the questions. One of the things I love about the webinars that 350 hosts is how engaged everybody is and how many questions y'all have. So I don't know if we'll get to everything, but at least one more. Fred asked, is it true that the lithium is what causes the fires? Do you know anything about that, Julia?
The lithium causes the fires. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I'm trying to think. They are working on sodium batteries. I mean, I think the fact that there's a liquid battery means that that there's a higher chance of fire. If we get solid state, it's going to be a lot less. But I'm not sure exactly what the chemistry is of what causes the fires.
Yeah, that's okay. Just thought
Sorry.
There was a question in the chat. There was another question about, do EV batteries both discharge and degrade faster in cold weather?
They discharge faster in cold weather. They do not degrade faster in cold weather, I don't think, unless maybe if it's really, really, really cold. Heat, however, does make them degrade faster. So if you do have an electric vehicle and you can keep it in a garage, that's better outside of direct sunlight because they do degrade faster in heat.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. We're just about at the hour. I want to flag that Amy put a call to action, I believe, in the chat here. It's the last thing. The Colorado budget is in the Joint Budget Committee. If anyone wants to call the 6 members and add your support. Amy, if there's anything else you want to add in there about that suggested action, please do. But I just want to say thank you, Julia, for your presentation. Thank you, Nicole, for telling us about the Clean Energy Credit Union. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Julia, really appreciate it. And feel free, everyone, to reach out with questions. I think you have contact info in the chat. And yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. That was great. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thanks. And I'll be contacting you.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah.
Plan.
Yeah, Julia, I got lots of thank yous in the chat.
Good, good. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could have answered all these questions. And I don't mind the controversial ones either.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of discussion in the chat. And actually, we really did get to almost everything, I think. So yeah, and thanks for sharing your email in the chat.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. Have a good afternoon.